Diversity and inclusion weren't always part of the corporate agenda. There was a time when these concepts were the frontiers of a new corporate conscience, and one team at Lockheed Martin was among the first to start implementing diversity as part of their strategy.
First, had to start from the foundation. So initially it was, why do we need to do this as a company?
Today we meet Shan Cooper, the leader who championed this transformative journey at Lockheed Martin, advocating for change and setting a new standard for the future of corporate America.
If you don't take the time to do it right, diversity is the one thing that can really divide your company.
Shan's journey is a testament to what it means to not just manage, but master the art of cultural transformation. I'm Dr. Jessica Kriegel, and this is Culture Leaders, where we decode the magic behind the masters of movements to unleash the power of culture. This is the story of Shan Cooper, master of a movement to encourage corporations to think proactively about diversity and inclusion.
You're listening to a Culture Partners production.
Shan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. My first question, as always, is what is your why?
My why, Jessica, first of all, let me thank you for having me, but my why is really, I think I was created to help people be their best selves. So my why is helping people find the things about them that make them great, that they may not know about themselves. It's about opening and creating and connecting people so they can often find others who can also help them excel. And so I would say it's just about helping other people be great.
And then what is Journey Forward Strategies? Why? What's the organization's mission statement?
I'm so glad you asked that. And it is all about preparing people to excel. And it's all people, right? Young, the old, preparing people to excel. And I started the company because during 2020, we had many students that did not have and could not find internships. And we know how important that is in the business world, right? And we had all these wonderful large companies that were doing the best that they could to help students get these hands-on experience. But we really needed a small ecosystem of small companies. And so I started my small company, partnered with some other small businesses to say, hey, let's do this. If I take one or two students and you take one or two students, we can ensure that our students that are here in Atlanta have an opportunity to get some real world experience. And that was my whole purpose for starting the company.
So what would you say is preventing people from excelling the most right now? What's the biggest challenge for us as employees in corporate America?
Right. I think, people talk a lot about the culture, right, and the environment of the places where people are being asked to come and work. And I think that's the number one area, right, that we find ourselves so in a world of change, right? So the business world is constantly changing, whether it's technologies or processes or things that our customers are demanding. And so if you're not a person who can navigate the change or understand how to do that, then you're going to be left behind. And it becomes frustrating and people become stressed. And so I think that's the world of business is changing so quickly that people are just struggling just to keep up. And so we've got to find, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we got to work in ways that are different, right? And and it's hard to get companies to see that when they've been successful. And so hopefully that's what I try to help companies do.
So what's interesting is we just did research this last year with Stanford University about what wins in organizations. And we dug into 243 companies, their purpose, their strategy, their revenue growth, their culture. And what we found, there was one type of culture that outperformed every other type of culture. 3x outperformed, and that was an adaptive culture, the ability to adapt to change. Now, the question naturally becomes, well, how do you become one of those cultures that can adapt to change?
Right. Well, I'll tell you that future-ready organizations are going to will be those organizations that can look at themselves, right, and be willing to make the change, so disrupt themselves in the marketplace. They're going to have to be willing to evolve, right, and change and be willing to do work differently. Think about how companies are struggling today, right, because my employees aren't in the building, right? Well, the world of work is changing. And so you've got to be an organization that can change and shift with that. And so you're going to have to learn how to self-disrupt, disrupt yourself as an organization to be able to, I think, win.
Yeah. So here's the issue, though. I think we're getting overwhelmed with the amount that we've got to do to keep up right now.
Yes.
I mean, there's this pervasive narrative that people don't want to work anymore and that there's a lot of apathy. I think that's the opposite of apathy. It's people feeling so overwhelmed that they are shutting down. And so now you've got this other task. I've got to disrupt myself. I'm already barely surviving, right? How do you make space for that? I mean, how do you actually coach people to do the disrupting when they're feeling that way?
Right. Well, first of all, you have to be real clear about where the organization is going. And right now, I think it's harder now to be in a leadership role, definitely than when I was in corporate America leading, right? Because now, as a leader, there's a greater emphasis on the leader as well as, and as a leader, you're going through the same issue, right? You're going through the change yourself, but you've got to now carry the burden of actually leading these folks. So what was required to be a leader when I was coming up in corporate America, I think has intensified because now you've got to be a better listener, right? What do leaders not do well? Most is typically listening, right? That has to become a core competency within leadership. You've got to be able to show empathy, to be vulnerable in many ways, to say, I don't know. Well, as a leader, you're not paid to do that, right? You're paid to have all the answers. But in this new world of working, you've got to find ways to engage people in the process of the change. And that's not how we were groomed as leaders, right? I wasn't groomed that way.
No, and I think you're bringing up a really good point. We're not paid to do that. We're paid to have the answers. We're not paid to listen. And you are in the business of trying to get CEOs to act in opposition to the incentives within the system that they are in, right? I mean, they're incentivized to create shareholder value at the expense of their employees, if that's what it takes, because that's what'll make them look good to the board or the shareholders. How do you tell CEOs what you're going to want to do is the opposite of what you're incentivized to do? I mean, how do we break this system that is making it impossible to not only do the right thing, but what, according to our research, gets results?
Right, exactly. So I think there's a couple of things. One, it starts with understanding that you are human as a CEO, right? As a business leader, you are human. And so putting yourself oftentimes in the shoes of others is always helpful thing to do. But you've got to have real clarity around where the organization needs to go. Because if you can paint the picture of the future and people can see themselves in that future, then they're much more willing to come along. But if you're uncertain about kind of where the company is going, so I'm big on being clear about what the strategy of the organization is, because you can have the greatest values, right? Most companies have good values. I think you have to have a shared sense of purpose with the purpose of the company. So I love your question. I love that you're asking leaders that question. What is the organization's purpose? I can tell when I was at Lockheed Martin, that was where when I started my cultural transformation work, the first question I needed us to answer together was, why do we come to work every day? And that was done in small group settings. People had a chance to voice, right? And that's why I say listening becomes so important as a leader. But as we worked through that question, and I did it in small settings, it takes time. And that's the one thing that most leaders don't have a lot of, but you have to make it a priority. And so teaching leaders to just stop, pause, breathe, engage with your workforce. Oftentimes, they're going to have the better answer anyway, but you got to engage them. But we have to have the common sense of purpose. Our purpose at Lockheed Martin with my team was real clear. You could ask anybody that worked there. We come to work every day to ensure the warfighter gets back to his or her family safely every time they touch our aircraft or weapon system. Real clear, real simple. The head and the heart. I didn't develop that as a leader. The team developed that. All 6,000 of us signed up for that, right? So having a real clear sense of purpose gets people to really feel like, hey, I'm really a part of this organization. And then as you can continue to craft the strategy, you're clear about your strategy, you're clear about your purpose, you're clear about your values. And then I often say, mission first, people always. The mission doesn't happen if the people aren't cared for. And so I bring my HR hat to that, right? Saying you got to focus on your people.
Yeah, that's an interesting purpose statement. I'm thinking about the perception of Lockheed Martin as an organization and the industry that it's in, and yet
Yes.
that mission is inspiring. I mean, I'm just fascinated by that. Like, what is the Chevron purpose statement? How does Chevron create a purpose statement that inspires people? Lockheed Martin. I mean, I actually did leadership work with Lockheed Martin early in my
Did you
career.
really? Awesome.
Yeah, and I was fascinated. They had some kind of leadership series, and I was brought in as a keynote speaker to talk about generational stereotyping. Maybe we worked together.
We probably
Who
worked
knows?
together, Jessica.
I mean, amazing. We could have. I feel like it would have been your team that hired me.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, we probably worked together.
I mean, all I remember from that event was that the security to get into the facility to do the keynote was more than TSA, first of all. And I forgot my makeup on that trip. So I showed up to do a keynote and I had no makeup. I was mortified. And I just thought, please, Lord, let no one notice that I'm going makeup free. And of course, I'm sure no one noticed. I was just so self-conscious.
I'm sure no one noticed that. No one noticed that.
Funny. So what was your exact role at Lockheed Martin?
So I had several roles. My first role going in, I was the inaugural head of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
In what year was that?
That was 2002.
That was before diversity, equity, and inclusion was cool.
You're right. So Lockheed Martin, really a cutting edge company. The interesting part about that, Jessica, is I've gotten this role, and we're all trying to figure out what the role should be after I said yes.
Welcome. Now, what are you doing here exactly?
Right, exactly. And so, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure because I had come from another organization where I was working in sales support, right? So I didn't know. So I tell you what, mentoring is so important. I was reading a magazine article, and at that time, IBM was the leading company. You may remember this in the work of global diversity. And Ted Childs was leading that organization. I picked up the phone. I called Ted and said, "Hey, Ted, I've got this new job. I have no idea what I'm doing. Can I come see you?" And he said, "How quickly can you get to New York?" And I spent 3 days just following, watching, and learning from Ted Childs. And I am so forever grateful to him because he just opened his doors, and it was wonderful.
Wow, that's amazing. What a service he provided there. That's amazing.
Yes.
Okay, so my belief on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and actually, I just worked with a company who says, what was it? It's a government institution that you've heard of, a federal government institution that calls it DEIA, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, which I hadn't heard before. Anyway, my belief on this is that there are too many companies treating it like an initiative. Yes. It's a program, right? We're going to have a program. And now we're going to care about diversity, and we're going to send everyone through training around unconscious bias, and we're going to start measuring how many people, non-whites, get promoted, and we're going to hire a certain percentage of people, and that's a great program, but it doesn't actually become infused in the culture. How do you create a culture that not just values diversity, but values diversity because they know that it works to drive results, which our research shows, and isn't treating it like a program?
Yeah, so that was the first thing that we did at Lockheed Martin. We said no programs. Don't label it. Don't call it anything. It's just going to be how we work. Now, understanding that Lockheed Martin is full of engineers, scientists, physicists, right? So we knew one of the issues that we knew we had to overcome is that we didn't want people to see this as something that was touchy-feely because it would not work in our culture, right? But we wanted to ensure that we were, again, focused on the employee experience, but first had to start from the foundation. So initially it was, why do we need to do this as a company, right? And one of the reasons why, because everybody talks about having a business case. I know you've heard that over and over. Well, ours was this. We're national defense. You look at our workforce of the future, our kids at that time were not really studying math and science. We were only graduating about 4,000 engineers annually across the country, right? So it was about our having a workforce of the future. That's a topic you can talk about with anybody in the organization, right? Whether they were black, blue, brown, didn't matter, regarding their age. And we could all get our heads wrapped around that. We've got to have a workforce of the future. We were very customer focused, We got to be here to serve our customer. The country, the world needs us, right? And not saying that in a boastful way, but just recognizing. And at that time, when I started the job, 90,000 people in our workforce were retirement eligible. Not they would go, but they were eligible within 5 years. So we had a real business case of why we had to have an environment and a culture, right, that was welcoming to women, right? National defense, very much male dominated, right? But we had to have an environment where women felt they could come and contribute to this company. And so that was how we started the process. What is the business rationale of why this is so important? That's why we would do this. And that was what I had in watching TED. That was what I had a chance to watch IBM do, because they were real clear about this is our business. This is how it ties in. So then I could go back and as I thought about it, put these things together, say, this is our business. This is why this is important to us, right? Why we have to do this. And everybody was given the opportunity to participate in the process. So if you looking at our data, we knew the makeup, the demographics, we knew all that data. We knew birth rates for our country. We knew who was studying, who was graduating. And if you looked at it, right, if you looked at birth rates alone, you could soon see that the minority populations, the people of color, were going to outgrow the Caucasian race. It is what it is. People don't like to hear you say that, but it is so, right? And so given that, we had to create an environment and culture where people felt they could come in and actually contribute and be a part of the Lockheed Martin team. And that was what we worked to do. And so a part of that was listening and making certain we were on our game. It was being out in community to help build that pipeline. It was investing, right? And so that was our what people would say, what's your business case? That was the business case of why I was brought in. It was about a workforce for the future.
What's interesting is, I mean, I can't imagine what it was like in 2002 to have that charter because, I mean, this is before we were okay talking about mental health in the workplace.
Yes.
This is before we were okay talking about all the issues that today feel like we're just starting to chip away at the surface of those issues. I mean, imagine in 2002 asking your average CEO, what do you think about having a conversation about the Black woman's experience in corporate America today?
Right.
I mean, they would have been like, no, we don't talk about that. That's
Right,
going to be really bad for culture, right?
Right.
And today,
But we were doing it.
But you were doing it?
We were
going
doing
that
it.
far in that
We were
year?
going that far in that year. We were going that far. And what we would do is I had an executive diversity council. Everybody did that, of course, chaired by our then COO. And Bob later became the CEO. But we had a council. But what we would do is we had to be educated, right? We recognized that we're not on the same place. We don't even define diversity the same, right? Because we brought our own experience to the table. So we would spend time talking about us, who we were first, right?
Yeah.
So we'd have a facilitator training 1 month. The next month we'd have a benchmark company come in because we had to learn. After the first year, we felt like we had our footing. Now, for people, most companies would say, "Gosh, that took you guys a long time," but we knew from my perspective, if you don't take the time to do it right, diversity is the one thing that can really divide your company. It will just rip you apart, right? If you don't get that right, I think.
Yeah, and where else are people going to do this but at work? I mean,
exactly.
I don't know any other place. I actually, interestingly, in Sacramento, they have a leadership development program for rising stars, people who are new in their career that want to. And it was founded by a guy named Scott Syfax, who the program is called the Nehemiah Emerging Leaders Program. And it was originally intended to be a program for Black young people to diversify ultimately the board service in the Sacramento region, to get more leaders of color, et cetera. After a few years, they were like, wait, we're having all these conversations about diversity, and yet internally we're not diverse. We need to have more diversity in our program. And so I ended up doing the program after they opened it up to non-Black people, essentially. And it was very interesting because it was led by Black leaders. It was predominantly Black people in the program. We're having conversations about race. I had been in the culture world for years. No one had even gotten near touching these subjects before as they did in that program. And I remember being like, well, explain to me the Black experience to one of the people in my class. And they said, it is not my job to educate you. I was like, oh my goodness, you're right. I'm so sorry. So then I started listening to all of these podcasts about like the stoop and these podcasts about the Black experience. And it completely blew my mind. I remember reading that book about white fragility. And there's a part in the book where it says the thing about race is that white people see whiteness as normal and everything else is other. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, I do think of it that way. That is exactly, white is normal and everything else is just other. This was 10 years ago. I'm like, holy crap, we are so off track. Because I think today, if you have that conversation with someone in the workplace, they'd still maybe have their mind blown because they haven't done the digging. We haven't forced them to have these conversations.
So my philosophy, this is Shan's philosophy. I think we continue to have to start over and over again with diversity discussions and business cases and those kinds of things. Excuse me. Because we haven't had the race discussion. If we had the race discussion in this country, it would be very different, I think. But we dance around it, right? By labeling it diversity and inclusion and equity. But we need to have the race discussion, and companies don't want to have that discussion. And some of it is because people don't know how to have the discussion, right? They think chaos is going to break out. But I think if you don't have those discussions, that you can't move forward. And I think, the progress that we made at Lockheed Martin, and I need to say this too, Jessica, because as people listen to this, that was that first year of diversity. I told you we spent time learning and becoming educated. The second year, we had one of the first mass shootings in the country at our facility in Mississippi. And it was
in your facility.
Yes. It actually was one of the facilities I got the chance to have oversight over a few years later.
And it was race-based.
It was race-based. You can go back and look at the history of it. And the shooter took the lives of 9 of our employees, injured 13 others, and then took his own life. And so, but as I thought about that, now remember, I'm in the diversity job.
Was the shooter white or black?
The shooter was white.
Okay.
We're in Mississippi. I get the call one morning saying, we've had a shooting. I need you to get to Mississippi. The shooting has happened. We think it might be race-related. So imagine me flying down, knowing the history of Mississippi and race relations, right? And so that's why I tell people, if you're going to go down this journey of diversity and inclusion, working in this space, put the work in. You got to and you got to be committed. And most companies probably would have stopped at that point. We didn't. Every day I was there. I went to every funeral except the shooters. I took children shopping for clothing from, and the hardest thing you'll ever have to do in your life is tell a child that mom's not coming home that day, right? Well, that was something that I had to do. And so it was the most pivotal moment in my career, because I had to go back now to 140 some odd, population, global, employee population, convincing the Black people that you don't work for a racist company, right? And the other people so everybody had an opinion about it, right? But we were determined we were going to stay the course and work this out. And so I went on my listening journey during that process, right? Because I needed people to be able to voice their hurt, voice what they were feeling, what they believed about the company. And we stayed the course. And it wasn't easy. Got a whole lot of hate mail. All these things, the company's trying to social engineer, blah, blah, blah. You get those things that happen, right? But it was such a small population. And we decided, what? If we can bring 80% of our population along, we're in a good space. That other 20% we'll continue to try to work with, what have you. At some point, you're probably not going to work here, right? If you don't come along to be the company that we want to be. And that's why I say, diversity, if companies aren't prepared to put the work in, just don't start the work, because it becomes very divisive otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of leaders have no idea. I mean, I just think there's a lot of ignorance in senior leadership too. I remember when I was at an organization, we were doing 9-box grid evaluations. Yes. And you're trying to identify the top talent. Yeah. And we thought we were super progressive. I was facilitating the conversation. It was a bunch of engineers. We thought we were really progressive because then we looked at it through various lenses. What percentage of our top talent are women? Which percentage of our top talent are non-white? That was a conversation for the second half of the call. The first half of the call, though, we're going through the top talent one by one and identifying why they're there. And the leaders would go around, well, this is Matt. Matt is in here because he's a doer and he's proactive.
Yes.
And this is John. And John is in here because he is just a brilliant problem solver. And they're listing all the capabilities. And then and this is Susan. Susan is a African-American Black woman. That's how they start the description of why she's in top talent. They've got to identify her race and gender off the bat, just so you all know.
Right, we found one.
We found one. Yeah, it was like, I'm sorry, pause. Why didn't you identify Matt and John as white men at the beginning of your spiel about them? Like, you noticed that? They're like, well, I just thought it was important that everyone know. It's like, okay, great. And can we talk about her actual attributes now? That kind of stuff happens all the time. I mean, I'm in conversations with white men in power all the time, and they will say things like, we really value diversity here. We're hiring lots of Black people. It's like,
right, exactly. You're like, what? Right.
Do you want a trophy? I'm going to take one of the millennial trophies for showing up and give it to you for hiring a Black woman.
And I would tell people, look, you can hire everybody that looks like me. If the culture and the environment doesn't work, I'm not staying. They're not staying.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they are talented, right? They are good at what they do. But
these leaders want a pat on the back for having noticed that there's race and that they're doing something about it. Or, I mean, it drives me insane because, I mean, there's still a lot of people out there who think, I don't see color. You don't see color.
Yeah.
That's big
insulting.
problem. Yeah,
that's insulting.
That's the problem, actually.
My color, right? Yeah. My color means something to me, right? I mean, this is a value to me, right? It shows strength and all. And so, that was one. But you know what? We made it safe, I think, at Lockheed Martin, for people to have those kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
And not have retribution, right? And we would tell people, ask the question, right? And just say, hey, there's a way to ask me. You want to know things, right? And one of the questions I can remember getting asked, and you'll love this, Jessica, was like, Shan, how is it and why is it that I can see a Black lady one day, she's got hair up to here, and the next day is really, really long? What is this weave thing? And so we had to talk about that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But you had to have those conversations, right? And it's like, hey, let's talk about that. Let me tell you what that means. And so we tried to have an environment where people could ask what sometimes seem like dumb questions, right? Or silly questions or insulting questions, but be able to talk about it. And I think that's the other reason why we don't talk about race, because people are like, well, I don't want to be sued if I say something that's offensive. And I just feel that we have to give each other grace, right? I'm going to probably say something stupid to a white person, right? You know, who knows? But we have to give each other grace. And so we were trying very hard at Lockheed Martin to say, let's show each other grace. Because if you don't ask the question and you don't understand, then you make assumptions. Right?
Yeah.
It makes it harder for us to team and focus on the work at hand. And the work is really, really important. So, yeah.
So did you go to McKinsey right after Lockheed?
No, I don't work for McKinsey. I'm a senior advisor to them. So they call on me if there's a project that's happening. They'll give me a call and say, hey, Shan, we've got this customer. What I bring, I think, is the real life experience to some of the work they like to do. You know what I'm saying? And if there's a client who says, well, look, I'd like to talk to somebody who's actually led a cultural transformation, right? What's the process? How do I do these things, right? So that I come in and just kind of help in that regard. So
what's the culture of McKinsey? I mean, they've been in the news a lot in this last year. For someone who actually works with the people in that organization, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so I'm shocked to hear that, because I love the McKinsey environment. I think they go above and beyond to ensure that people have balance. You hear about, I was in consulting. I had a consulting company early in my career, and I had some partners. And I knew pretty quickly that consulting was not the life for me, because it's all about billable hours, right? You're killing yourself. You're traveling every week. McKinsey is very good about helping people find balance, right? Need a health day, take it. Coming off a big project, take a week off, rejuvenate, refill, kind of settle yourself, what have you. I love that. They also encourage folks, hey, if you want to go off and get another degree, go. And when you're done, call us, because we'll probably have a role for you. You know what I'm saying? And so people know, so that's why you see people, it's kind of a revolving door in some ways, because people do, they go off, they get different experiences, and they're able to come back.
Yeah.
And so again, because I'm not in the environment every day, but for the teams I get to touch and work with, it's just an incredible group of people, incredible place to work.
So speaking of degrees, one thing that we have in common, I'm getting a master's in divinity right now, and you
Are you really?
were
Oh my
engaged
gosh,
in
wonderful.
religious studies too, right?
Yes, yes.
So
So my
how does
dad's a
that?
okay.
Oh, go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
tell me.
No, so
No,
say my
your
dad's a
dad's a pastor?
pastor. Yes, 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 and he's
So
still
you had
pastor
it in your
today.
bones.
It was in my bones. But what I wanted to do is, Jessica, I had grown up in one faith. I knew there was others out there, and I wanted to learn about them. So that was what got me to study degrees. So I have a degree in biology. I mean, biology, dual degree, biology and religion,
That's
and that was why I
amazing.
did it.
First of all, you double majored in biology and religion. That's a story in and of
Yes.
itself.
Yeah, my friends teased me. My friends would tease me that I was going to become a witch doctor, but that was not my plan. So,
Oh, that's great. So I decided to go and get this master's. It's my third graduate degree. I guess I like
mhm.
school. It's funny because I was never very good at school, but I just want to someone tell me what to read. That's
Yeah,
essentially why I
yeah.
keep going back. I was a lifelong atheist. I had a spiritual experience when I was
Mm,
37, and I suddenly believed in God. And I had
mhm,
no idea what God I believed in because I had never been to church. I didn't know
mhm,
anything about any
mhm,
religion. So
mhm,
I figured, let me go to school. They'll tell me
mhm.
what to believe, or at least what to read to figure out what to believe. I still really haven't figured it out. But I see in my work so much connection between what I
Mhm,
do as a culture transformation specialist, social transformation, right? And what I'm
right.
learning in this master's in divinity. And I go to a school, Pacific School of Religion. It's radically inclusive is their thing, right?
Mhm,
So we've got
mhm,
trans students in our class, and they are welcomed with open arms and
mhm,
encouraged to
mhm,
become ordained
mhm.
and to become spiritual leaders, which is
Yes, yes.
unique in the world
Mhm,
of religion, right? I mean,
mhm. It's
so
very unique.
do you see the tie between religion and work, even though it feels antithetical to each other, right? I mean, how do they
No,
connect for you?
yeah, I tell you what, I would not have survived corporate America without my faith.
Mm.
I was often the only woman, often the only person of color in the room. Um, and people aren't always kind, right? And you know that, Jessica.
That's an
And
understatement.
so, right. And so I had to have a way of going to work every day, not knowing what I was going to face, but still show up as the authentic Shan, the person that I am. And I had to show up in a way that was good for me. And I would
Mm.
tell people often, I am teachable, I am shapeable, but there's a core to Shan that's who I am that won't change, right? My expectations were high. So I would be the senior leader there. I don't drink uh, because it's my faith doesn't allow us to do that. And but I could do it in a way I could still be out at the Christmas party or the gatherings with the leaders, the guys, right, and everybody, and not judge.
Mm.
And so one of my big things I try to tell people, start from a place of inquiry, not judgment. That's part of the issue that we have, right? And so I could do those things. These are things my parents taught me, right? Um, and also too, I was always taught that God doesn't make mistakes, and He created us all. So there has to be something good in all of us, right? Because He made us, right? And He's perfect, and He's love. And so because He's love, and you say you belong to Him, then love has to be an expression and an action word, right? That you show people every day. And so my leadership style was usually different from my peers, right? Uh, my standards were high, and anybody who worked for me would tell you, Shan had high standards of performance, but the way that I gave feedback, right? The way that I engaged with my teams, the folks that I had the honor to work with, was usually different than my peers. Most of them had
Yeah.
come out of the military, boom, whatever, right? Very much command and control. That wasn't my style. So I was very different. So I always kind of stood out in that way, but it was because of my faith and how I was determined that I was going to treat people and show people love. Still hold them to standards, still do all that. And let me tell you, if you talk to my team today, they would tell you I was probably one of their best leaders
Mm.
because I worked hard at it.
So it's interesting you talk about authenticity, and this is a perfect example of a way in which my studies in religion impact
Mm-hmm.
the thought leadership I'm doing in the world of culture. So I was on board with the authenticity train. We got to be our whole self, bring our whole selves to work and be our authentic selves. And then I read Howard Thurman's Jesus and the
Mm-hmm.
Disinherited. So Howard Thurman, for
Mm-hmm.
those who aren't aware, Black preacher, civil rights activist, and he was talking about fear and racism. And he says that one of the tools and coping mechanisms uh, against racism is deception. That sometimes we feel, and I could see this as a woman in corporate America, that sometimes we
Mm-hmm.
have to act a certain way. There's a bit of deception in the way that we show up. I'm not really my authentic self in every room because I want to
Mm-hmm.
fit in so that I'm not judged, so that I can advance, so that I can, right? And so there is sometimes the necessity to be deceptive. And it doesn't mean getting away with something, it means not bringing your authentic self to work because your authentic self is not welcome here in certain cultures. And then I
Right.
realized we got all these HR leaders talking about bring your authentic self to work. The problem is not in people who are being deceptive. The problem is in the
Right.
leaders who are not accepting of every
Yes.
kind of authenticity
Yes.
that
Yes. Yes.
shows
See, you
up,
took the
right?
words from my mouth. You took the words, because I tell people, I don't tell people that you can bring your authentic self to work.
Mm,
um, because you really can't. I tell people, understand the culture that you're working in, and then determine how much of you still be real and authentic, but how much of you do you
mm-hmm.
want to bring to the workplace, right?
Yeah.
Um, I can remember a young lady coming to me, and I never give people direct answers. I try to ask them questions so they can kind of discover what they think is the right thing to do. But she comes to me one day. She's an executive assistant, and she says, I'm going to go, I think I want to go get dressed. This was my early tenure in Lockheed Martin, right? We were very conservative, very button up. Everybody wore dark blue suits. You know what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
was the culture at that time, right?
Right.
And I said to her, she said, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, what do you aspire to do? She said, well, I aspire to be the CEO's executive assistant. I want to be up there on the top floor. I want to be up there working with them. I said, well, I want you to do this. I want you to go walk that floor and tell me what you see.
Mm,
And then you come back and tell me what you're going to do. Because I'm going to support you in whatever you do. But I want you to be wise and smart, right, about this decision. She went and walked and came back a couple of days later and said, you know what? It's probably not the right thing to do. I said, you're probably right, but it's your call. And so
yeah.
people need to understand that when we tell you to bring your authentic self to work, I don't think that's a fair statement to your point. And I don't advise people to do that.
Yeah.
But you bring what you want to bring to the workplace, but don't let the workplace change who you are, right? And sometimes there's not going to be that cultural fit. Sometimes you're going to have to go work somewhere else. I mean, I was a VP of HR after I left the diversity role. I ran HR for one of the largest division in Lockheed Martin, about 54,000 people. And I'm thinking globally, 72 countries, okay? And the reality was, you need to understand the culture and the climate, right, where you worked, in your workspace, in your work area, in your work environment. And that was how I would talk to people about it, because you're absolutely right. You can't bring all of you to the workplace because people aren't ready.
And it makes me think of Michelle Obama saying, Americans were not ready for my natural black hair. You see her with dreadlocks, but she's out of the White House and she's like, okay, now it's time. And I mean, that should be a wake-up call that the first lady is like,
right.
You guys aren't ready for this.
We're
I'm
not
just
ready.
gonna I mean, I don't think people spend much time thinking about this kind of stuff. And that's a great, great shame because it's what allows this. I mean, I was having a conversation internally about some of the impacts that systemic racism has in the dynamics in the room when we're facilitating and the way that we show up. And I remember someone who's no longer with the company, I will say, Jessica, we're not going to solve systemic racism with our intellectual property. And it was like, that sounds like someone who's not even interested in trying.
Right.
Who's not even interested in advancing the conversation.
Right.
And it's such a shame. It's also really uncomfortable. I mean, it's got to be 10 times more uncomfortable than people realize to be a non-white in the workplace today.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I tell you, and for some of the folks that I coach, and it's people of color, but it's also still women
Mm,
of all colors, right? And you talked earlier about being, and I remember sitting in succession planning sessions as well, right? And I remember even talking to women saying, hey, talk to me about your career aspirations, what have you, right? And they would just talk themselves right out of, because they thought they had to be perfect, right?
mm,
Well, I've never done that. And I would be like, wait a minute, but you've demonstrated here that you can learn. You've got great learning agility. I really
hmm
think you can do this job, right? Um, and then, of course, because I believe that, I believe that to be true. I mean, I kind of did my own thing the same way, where I went from HR to operations, which is unheard of, right, in
hmm
any company, right? But when the opportunity may became available and they called and said, hey, would you be interested in competing for this role? I'm like, absolutely, I would. I'd never built an airplane or a website in my life. But I'm like, you know what? I can learn. And I think I got the call because I had demonstrated I could learn, right? And so we as women, sometimes we just talk talk ourselves out of these wonderful opportunities, right? Versus just saying,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to take this on. Because trust me, John is saying that he can do that and three other things, right? And he's never done
Yeah.
any of it, right? So,
John's got
right,
it. John is
right,
all over it. Freaking John. Oh, that's so funny. So,
oh
I mean,
gosh. So, yeah.
yeah, in case any listener out there, male listener, thinks that being a woman in corporate America is now easy, it's not. It hasn't. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe it's gotten easier, but I am to this day getting mansplained things on a regular basis. I remember
Mm-hmm.
I got an email from someone um, who wanted to forward an article to me because I'm a thought leader. I'm talking about things. I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about
Right,
things. They
right,
want to give me
right.
something to read. So I love it when people send me articles that they think I might find of interest. But the way that they introduced the article was, hey, Jessica, thought you might like this article in the New Yorker. The New Yorker is a well-regarded weekly magazine. And I'm like, dude, I had a subscription to the New Yorker when I was 23 years old. You don't have to tell me what the New Yorker is. I have 3 graduate degrees. What have you done lately? Don't tell me about the New Yorker. And you know what I did instead? I ignored the email. I didn't
Yeah.
even, should I have told that guy? How dare you explain what the New
Right.
Yorker to me is? That's so insulting. I don't even know what
But
the
that
right answer was.
Yeah, but that was a teachable moment, right? And
It was a
that
teachable
I
moment.
will teach as much as I can, in a way, and I always do things with a smile. But Jessica, you mentioned something earlier, and the one thing that that I'm a little concerned about, and I want to do a little bit more research on this as well. But there's a wonderful organization here called Path Builders, and they've just recently done I haven't read the whole thing, but it's talking about women who are mid-career, women who would be in that pipeline to be these senior, they're opting out.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that
They're
too.
opting out in droves. And
You know
that
why?
concerns me.
I know why. Because it is insane to operate at the
Yeah.
level that we have to operate in order to
Yes.
make it as an executive in corporate America
Yes.
today.
Yes. Yes.
The
Yes.
burnout is real. And women are
No,
smarter
it's
than
very
men.
real.
Just kidding. But
Right.
they are
No, no,
smart and they're saying, no, thank you. I'm not going to do that. I don't care about power that much.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so that's when I talk about, I want to dig into the research because I think that it just kind of reinforces, my belief that how work gets done in the next 10 years, it'll look nothing like it is today.
Yeah.
Because women are a talent pipeline that we need.
Yeah. Well, we
in these
did research last year.
organizations.
I'll send you the
So,
research we did. We
please
looked at
do.
organizations that had less than 20% of their leadership roles filled by women and
Mhm.
compared it to companies that had somewhere between 45 and 75% of their leadership roles filled by women. The companies
Mhm.
with more women in leadership outperformed in every dimension, not just for the women, but for the men as well, in engagement, in development, in clarity of
Yes.
results, men and women. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
you don't have to be a rocket scientist at Lockheed Martin to figure out the power of diversity and leadership.
Yeah.
But it feels like we still have to keep doing all this
But
research
we
and
still
sharing it.
have to keep.
Yeah.
We still have to keep doing this business case work, and it just makes my head spin. Just makes my head spin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm writing a paper right now, actually. It's the end of the semester, and I'm in a class about ethics. And
Mm.
the paper, every paper I write, I bring it to the corporate world because it's the lens through which I see and process everything.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm writing about the circular lack of accountability the absolution of accountability that we all are a part of systemically in corporate America. So you've got the employees who are, whatever they're engaged in, they blame the leaders, right? It's the leader's fault. And then right? And then the leaders, they were like, well, we would love to do better. I actually interviewed a CEO who said these words: I am just as exploited as the frontline worker. I was like, really? Tell me more about that. He said, yeah, because I would make all sorts of changes at this company if I could, but I can't because the shareholders and the investors expect something of me.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, really? Okay. So then you go to the investors, even those managing big funds, right? The investors are managing funds for the general public, for the people. You know who the general public are? The employees. And so we go back to the employees and they're like, it's not my fault, it's the leaders. And so there's this circle, systemic lack of accountability that exists. And there's the only way to break out of it, personal responsibility, accountability.
Oh, absolutely.
To just say, I'm going to do it differently, even if the system doesn't. And then enough of us do that.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it's going to take.
Yeah, It's the only way. And I think women are going to be a big part of that. People of color are going to be a big part of that.
Absolutely are. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a caller that has a question for you. So I'm eating up all of our time. This has been such an awesome conversation, but I'm going to share you with our caller now and see what they have in store for us.
Hi, my name is Coach Blaza, and my question is, what are the top 5 attributes when building a good team dynamic?
Oh, top 5 attributes. Okay. What do you think, Shan?
Great. So a couple things come to mind for me. One, I want people on the team who operate at the highest levels of integrity. That to me is job one. Then having a team where, as you talked about, I see it, I solve it, I own it, I do it. I take accountability, right, for what I have to bring to the table.
Are you quoting the Oz principle right now, Shan?
You know what?
That's our book. That's our book. You know that?
It's one of my favorites. It is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites. Let me tell you, my favorite book of all time, and I make everybody read, is Change Culture, Change the Game. But getting back to her question.
Do you know that that's our company's book?
I did not know that, but do you know that was the book that I used to drive the culture change at my last assignment at Lockheed Martin?
Shan, we have to go back and do this whole interview over again because you are leveraging our tools. That's so cool. You didn't even know that was us.
Let me tell you, it's my favorite thing. You can't see it on my bookshelf back here, but it's right here, back here behind me. I give it out. I've ordered copies. It's just wonderful. But that whole notion of just, you talk about accountability, right? As being a part of the team, you have to bring it to the table, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, I like to see good judgment. And unfortunately, judgment is not something I can send you to a class to get, right?
Yeah.
But I like to see people on the team who have good judgment. I want people on the team who have ambition. People with ambition, they want to be excellent, right? And so if you got people around the team who are ambitious and who want my job even, right? I mean, great things happen. Great things happen. And then I want people who are just great communicators, right? That are open to feedback, good listeners. That whole communication process is absolutely key when you're building a team. So those are the things that I think are important.
Well, that's excellent. I mean, and I obviously agree because you're quoting our books.
I
can't believe it. It is brilliant, isn't it? That's my number one book recommendation is Change the Culture, Change the Game. You want to know anything about culture? That's your book to read.
That's the book. And let me tell you, when I was leading the culture change here at my last job at Lockheed Martin, I will tell you, we had a book club. So every Friday, you had to, and I wouldn't do it myself. I assigned, leaders got assigned a chapter and they had to come teach the rest of us. Now we had to read it. But the more, if you have to teach something, you begin to kind of own it. It becomes a part of who you are. And everybody in the facility, in the leadership team, top to bottom, everybody had to read the book and we had to talk about it.
Yeah.
And just bring it. So I love it. It's my work Bible.
That is amazing. Okay, I have one last question for you before the last question. So secretly, it's 2 questions.
Okay.
What is the thing that you are most worried about right now?
I am worried about really this movement in the technical world, AI, you name it, right? That's happening. and people not being able to catch up, right? So when you're talking about transformation, people often talk about people, process, and technology, but you also have to think strategy and structure, right? And I think technology is going to continue to be, it always has been, a driving force in business and how work gets done. And I get worried that we're not investing enough in our people so that they're ready, right? And it's an expensive proposition. I get that. But if you think of people as your assets, then you invest in your assets, right? We talk about, our people are our greatest assets. The moment we have to cut costs, what do? We cut our people, right? Versus pausing to look at, well, can we do the work differently? What is the work that we should be doing versus not? And so I just get worried that we're not bringing people along, that they can be competitive in the future work world. I worry about that.
Yeah, I worry about that too. I mean, I don't know how to talk about AI with business leaders because there's so much unknown. Everyone's talking about education. Okay, but how do you educate on speculation about the future?
Exactly. And we're all trying to figure it out. We're really all trying to figure it out. But yeah, that's the one thing I worry about.
I mean, I look at the OpenAI Sam Altman fiasco, right? He was pushed out by a board that was concerned about this very thing. And then the employees rose up, non-unionized employees all spoke up and said, no, we want Sam back. And, ultimately the money won, right? I mean, the money won in that situation, and the people wanted him. He's a great leader, I have no doubt. But I worry about these companies who are putting profits before what potential harms this might cause.
Absolutely. And I like I said, we don't even know where it's going to go from here today, but I think we've lost the moment to be able to really manage it or put, structure a framework around it. So it's going to have to be done at an individual company level. And will we get that right? But we've got to prepare people to be able to be competitive in the future. And I'm not sure that we're thinking enough about that today.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. Well, here is my actual last question, and my favorite one. What is one thing that no one really asks you on these interviews that you wish more people would ask?
And I had just a few minutes to think about that. So, people often ask me, Shan, what was the defining moment, in your career or what have that happened, that either prepared you for the next leadership role or that, prepared you to lead people. They never ask me about the personal side of my life. Like, what were those defining moments, right? That caused me to say, gosh, I want to be a different kind of person, right? And I'll never forget, it was the summer between my junior year and my senior year in high school. And I was off at Dolphin Island doing a marine biology course. And back then, I'm dating myself, long distance calls were not free. And I remember talking to my mom, and she's saying, Shan, Edwin keeps calling you. One of my friends was Edwin Ramos, and Edwin keeps calling you. She said, well, I finally told him, listen, Shan's not coming home until the end of the month, what have you, because it was a month program. And he committed suicide that summer. And for years and years, I didn't talk about it. My parents say, when you're a believer, people often say, well, pray about it, whatever. But at that time in my life as a young person, I didn't know how to deal with it, didn't know how to process it, right? But the one thing I knew is that, gosh, you know what? If anybody ever calls me, I'm returning their call. Because could there have been a different outcome, right? If Edwin had been able to talk to me, and probably not. I can't say, I don't know that to be true, right? But in a young person's mind, that's what you think, right? Gosh, if I had been home, right, he'd still be here. What I said at that moment, and forever, and I've carried that throughout my entire life. People will say, oh gosh, yeah, I really want to talk to you. Well, give me a call. And it drives my executive assistant crazy. But I just determined, because she was like, you have no time. Why are you telling these people to call you? But I just believe that when people say, gosh, I just want to talk to you, that we should make ourselves available. And oftentimes they're saying, well, Shan, I want you to be my mentor. And I can't take on another mentee, right? And I'll just say, look, I'm not taking it, but I'll give you a career discussion. I'll give anybody a career discussion. I'll help you. but I can't own mentoring, right? Because that's a real long commitment. But that's what that experience taught me. And so if you know people that know me, they'll tell you, God, Shan's going to return your call. Now, you don't want to call me, though, if you've been arrested and I'm your first call. Don't call me. Don't let me be your first call.
Bail will not be doled out.
It might take me a few days to get back to you, right? But within 48 hours, you're going to hear from me, right? So that's the one thing. And different things like that happen in your life early on that make you say, gosh, I'm going to always do something, or I want to do this differently, But that
what
was
a beautiful story. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing that personal side of things. Out of curiosity, what is your faith?
I actually attend St. Philip AME Church. So I grew up Pentecostal, though. So interesting, I grew up Pentecostal, no makeup, women didn't wear pants, all that exterior stuff that my dad finally said, what are we doing, right? This is he cares about your heart. He doesn't care about all that stuff. So now I never leave home without makeup. It's like my American Express card.
I also never leave home without makeup unless I'm giving a keynote at Lockheed Martin, in which case I do leave home without makeup, and I never forget it after that because of how embarrassed I was.
That's why I said that. I had to but I grew up Pentecostal, Mm-hmm.
That's the fastest growing Christian faith in the world right now. Interestingly.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
It's
It's showing up differently though, right? There's like the Diet Coke version of Pentecostal, which not the snakes and the talking in tongues vibes, but more just kind of like preachy. And so, I've gone to a lot of churches that after the fact, I'm looking it up to figure out, what was that? It was Pentecostal. And yet it's kind of the more, what do you call it? The less hard to relate to Pentecostal for the outsider,
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, well, anyway.
Well, we're very demonstrative. I'll say that. Yes.
Indeed. Book of Acts, right? I mean, the Pentecostal, that's what's interesting. I thought I might be Pentecostal for a minute because I had a spiritual experience. I had this miracle happen that I knew undeniably was not of human power of this earth, right? And so then I was like, well, what religion believes in like lots of miracles and stuff? Because that's what I'm into. The Catholic Church also, by the way, really into miracles. I'm still trying to figure it out. But then I found out that the Catholic Church doesn't ordain women. And I'm like, I can't get into a church that doesn't ordain women. It says I don't belong. And yet it's the only Christian faith that believes in the divinity of Mary. So there is this divine feminine in Catholicism that doesn't exist in the other religions. I am on a total tangent right now. We got to wrap it up. Okay. Shan, thank you for your time.
This was great, Jessica.
I'm going to call you after this to finish our conversation about religion, and you're going to call me back. You're definitely going to call me back.
I'm going to call you back. I'll definitely call you.
But thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Culture Leaders. I'm Dr. Jessica Kriegel, hoping you found inspiration in today's story. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review and share your thoughts. And thanks for listening.
To connect and learn more about today's guest, visit the link section on this episode's show notes. Please be sure to connect with Jessica and the show at jessicakriegel.com. There, you'll be able to see all the episodes and learn more about transforming culture at your organization. This episode is a Culture Partners production. Until next time, keep shaping a positive culture. Thanks for listening.